brings us to feel like, oh boy, I don't think they know as much as they're making it seem they know, because they're just giving so many counter statements and conflicting statements. Oh, welcome back to the Schaik Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Van Schaik. Still looking for co-hosts. Yeah, that's getting old. All right, so we recently put out a main channel video on the Idaho 4. It's being called that right now, and it's the University of Idaho murders of, sadly, 4 college students in their off-campus house. So apparently what happened is these 5 girls got an off-campus house, and I guess they were a little bit later in their college careers, juniors and seniors, it appears. So they had this 6-bedroom, 3-bath house off campus. And, it was going to be great. They were going to have fun. They were going to throw parties. They were not be, I guess, restricted by so much of the college's rules, of RAs, residence assistants, and everything like that. They didn't have to worry about it. Sounded great until many of them were sadly murdered. There were 5 girls in total in the house, 6 bedrooms, 3-bath house, and 3 of the girls got murdered. And the boyfriend of one of the girls was murdered while he was in her room. And the 2 girls who were sleeping in the bottom floor of the house, where the main floor, where the main entrance is located. This is not a basement so much, right? Because the main entrance leads into the main floor of the house. And that's where those 2 girls were sleeping. And those 2 girls, nothing happened to them. Apparently, no one tried anything to break into their rooms or tried to hurt them. They were fine. Seems a little odd, and we'll get into that. And we have a lot to discuss on this topic. A lot that's kind of swirling around. A lot that the mainstream media is not talking about. Okay, so first off, the police. Okay, the local police. They are a very small town. 25,000. Okay, so the local police force is probably no more than, 10 or 12. At best, 10 or 12, okay? It's a tiny, tiny town. It's mostly the university. And I presume the university has their own campus security as well. So it's not like Moscow police, that's where it's located, in Moscow, Idaho. So it's not even like Moscow police even have to patrol into the university that much, other than when there's some specific law enforcement or arrest that has to be made on campus. Here's the thing. When this case was first discovered, right, that there were 4 dead in that house, who was in charge? It was the Moscow police. And I want to be clear. I think the Moscow police, they mean well. They're not nefarious. They're not trying anything bad. They're just, the point that I'm making, and that I'm going to be making further, is that they're very limited staff, and they're not very familiar with this type of investigation. The last murder that has ever occurred in Moscow, Idaho, the last one ever, get this, 7 years ago. It was 7 years. 7 years, guys. Gosh. Now the FBI is involved with their behavioral analysis unit. It's the same depicted unit in Criminal Minds, if you ever seen that show. It's kind of funny because the actual behavioral analysis unit of the FBI, they're nothing like what you see in Criminal Minds at all. It's completely different. It's just very dramatized and fictionalized. It's pretty terrible. And then of course the BAU in Criminal Minds, they make it seem like, they're these like superhero type people that are going to bust in and solve all the cases and catch them red-handed and stuff. It's just so fictional. It's really funny. And I think, I don't know exactly, but one time I looked it up, and it turns out the behavioral analysis unit, guess how many cases they've independently solved themselves? It turns out that they solved 0 cases on their own. 0. Where in the TV show, they're like these superheroes, so nothing could be really further from the truth. I mean, they're exactly what you think, right? They're just kind of looking at some of the behavior of a criminal. And of course, the TV show dramatically dramatized what they actually do. But they said there's 2 behavioral analysis units that are there. But then it later came out that there's actually just 2 FBI agents that were actually on scene. That it wasn't 2 units, it was just 2 individuals. So it was like, okay now, all right. That there's a big difference between, like 10 groups of people or just 2 people. So yeah, it's just, oh my goodness. It's just so understaffed over there. The police department, local police, I think they're leading the investigation with their, I guess, half a dozen police officers in that police force. And they're going through the investigation and they're going through it and it's okay. And then they come back and they announce how much evidence they got. And everyone that is familiar with these types of cases, 4 homicides in a single location, oh my goodness, there's probably, thousands of pieces of evidence that they're actually going to uncover after they've, done their investigation that they said they did. Guess how many pieces of evidence they have so far in the case? It's like 140 or something. It's like under 200, guys. It's like just mind-blowing. It's like, dude, do you understand that you're supposed to have thousands at this point? Like, it's 4 people. You're supposed to have thousands of pieces of evidence. That makes you think, oh my gosh, oh my goodness, what are they missing, right? I mean, that evidence is not just like, oh, well, you don't need that piece of evidence. Who needs that? No, these are really important pieces of evidence you need to build a case and also to prosecute somebody. That's a whole nother thing too. Even if they eventually do find the person, even if they eventually, track the person down finally, and if they only have 100 and some odd pieces of evidence, that's a big problem to be able to effectively prosecute the individual that you think did it, the suspect. How are you going to prosecute someone if you're missing so many key pieces of evidence, allegedly? I mean, it's possible that there were just no evidence, but I just highly doubt that. I highly doubt that there's just not that much evidence where, 140. Yeah, that's all we need. Yeah, that's all we found. A little alarming on that front. And yeah, hopefully there is enough evidence to even prosecute somebody that, does come out to be the suspect. Again, this is not a knock against them. I grew up in a small town too. So I think I'm kind of getting at is this. I think for these types of cases, okay, I think the federal government should step in and lead the investigation. I think that makes sense because there's a lot of small towns that only have like a handful of police officers, like 2 or 3 police officers. Maybe not 2, but it could be, right? Like if you're small enough. But what happens if you have a big murder in a small town? What happens? They're not only don't have enough police officers to effectively retrieve the evidence, and they also don't have the experience of handling murder cases because they don't happen very often in such a small town. There's just not enough people for that to statistically happen in such a small town. In these small towns, I think the federal government should step in and start to lead the investigation. It only makes sense. They have more of the experience to actually do something like that in these big murder cases. Maybe if it's just a small homicide, you kind of know what happened. Okay, the small town could handle that, of course. But if you get to a big homicide in such a small town, what is a 2 or 3, police officer, police force are going to do to actually investigate, solve with any experience, because they probably don't have that experience. And it's very possible the last time they even investigated a murder case was practicing in police academy decades ago. So it's very, very, very important, as you can imagine, to have this type of experience, to have this type of police force to be able to handle such a massive case. And I think the federal government must step in these situations. And on the same token of the police department not being very experienced in this type of investigation, there's also another thing that I'm noticing that I'm not very confident in what they're doing, is that they're ruling out people very, very quickly. Do you seem to notice that? They're ruling out this person, that person, the roommates, the boyfriends, these people, this person. They're just ruling people out, and they're not giving a real explanation of why they're ruling these people out. If you think about it, why are they ruling them out? I mean, how could you actually rule them out? Do you have footage of them at this location and it's proof that they were there? Or maybe are you just, interviewing them and you kind of get a sense that, oh yeah, they seem innocent. They don't seem like they've done it. They have an alibi. Why are they ruling these guys out? And if they were a more experienced police force, I would trust their judgment a little bit more. But with this police force, I don't. I'm sorry. I just don't trust their judgment that much. I mean, I kind of hope that they have some sense of being able to rule people out effectively, but I'm not very convinced of it at all. I'm not. With a case like this that seems to be done by an experienced person, and also it could be done by someone who is a professional, meaning possibly a hitman. And if it's done by a hitman, guess what? All the people you just ruled out all of a sudden ruled back in, unless they looked at every single possibility imaginable, right? Every possibility. I'm talking about, cell phone records, social media, chats, any communication to indicate that maybe they were in contact with a hitman to assist with this type of crime. Given that this crime is done by someone that seems to be experienced, that this is not their first rodeo, it could be a hitman, and you have to take that into account at this point, especially. And maybe some people should be ruled back in, and there's just so much sloppiness and counter statements by police. One day they're like, yeah, it probably is targeted. And the next day is like, well, maybe it's not targeted. Next day is like, well, maybe the house was targeted. And then the next day they're like, well, the house wouldn't be, why would the house be targeted? It wasn't a burglary. Why would the house be targeted? And the next day they're like, well, maybe the kids were targeted. It's just like one thing after another, which again, brings us to feel like, oh boy, I don't think they know as much as they're making it seem they know, because they're just giving so many counter statements and conflicting statements. I've never seen something like this. But I think this is what happens when a very big murder occurs in a very small town with a very small police force. Again, that can be a very big problem. And if you're thinking about it, that's maybe why the unsub, the unidentified subject, why the unsub wanted to maybe target them. If you have a serial killer in the area, he's probably going to be thinking, wait a second, why should I go for the one in Seattle, Washington, the college campus there, as opposed to maybe going with a college campus in Moscow, Idaho, with a tiny police force where people leave their doors open because it's just that tiny small town community, and target there, where the police force is so tiny and so inexperienced that the serial killer, could more likely get away with it. It's sad, but I think that could have been part of the calculus of the unsub if it actually was a serial killer. It's a lot easier to get away with. It's a lot easier to get into the house. I can almost guarantee that some door, some window was open. Was not locked. I guarantee they were not locking every door and window before bed. Surely not. Especially when you have that many people. Some people don't bring their keys. You go out to a party, I'm not going to bring my keys. We just leave the door open because it's that type of community where everything's, small and we don't have any crime here. It's on campus. And what's going to happen, right? And they're not going to be, make sure we lock the door before bed. I mean, I do that. I think, if you live in a bigger city or town, you'll do that. But if you live in a small town, you're not really going to be thinking of it that much, because these types of crimes don't occur very often where you live. Therefore, doesn't really spark any idea or any alertness in your head to make sure you lock all your doors and windows before you go to bed, which you should. You should. Everyone should do that. I mean, I can't imagine why you wouldn't. Because you can have this type of situation, and again, I think that played a major role in the unsubs calculus to target them. With social media, a serial killer now does not have to operate in big cities. Doesn't have to do that anymore, or within their own personal cities that they know. They don't have to do that. They can find exactly who they want, exactly their type, and target them on social media, stalk them, and then make a move on a individual in a small town where they are much more likely to get in and get away with it, because they're also less likely to have cameras in addition to everything else we just talked about. I think everyone in small towns, you have to lock your doors. Also, here's another thing. I think the reason why that house was targeted with those girls in it was because there was no cameras. Clearly there was no cameras because the police don't have any footage. Right? If you're a stalker, serial killer, if you're that type of person, right? And you're doing you're casing the joint, right? You're trying to find a good location for you to carry out the crime. You're going to look for an area that has no security cameras. None, right? Security cameras are going to blow your cover. And if you think about it, if that house had a video camera doorbell, and if they had that, do you think the unsub would actually target that house? Probably not, because the unsub doesn't want to get caught on camera. And also, he's probably worried that inside the house is also going to be covered in cameras too. If you have a video camera doorbell, it at least gives the idea to the criminal, whether it's a burglar, murderer, serial, whatever it is, it gives them the idea that there's other cameras throughout the house. So stay away from that house. He's just going to think, go to another house that doesn't have a video camera doorbell. Because if they don't have a video camera doorbell, 99.9% sure there's no other cameras or any other security system throughout the house, because the first thing that you get is a video camera doorbell. That's the very first thing that people get for security, right? So if someone doesn't have that, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, they're probably, naked, so to speak. The house is naked of any type of security systems or cameras. This podcast is not sponsored by a video camera doorbell system. And going back to some of the more sloppiness of the police, 2 weeks after the crime, right? 2 weeks after, they finally take in the cars, the vehicles of the girls into a crime lab. 2 weeks, guys. That was supposed to be done the first or second day. Is that you take the vehicles and you go through them with a fine-tooth comb in a crime lab. How could they just not do that? That's like one of the first things they do. And yes, you may want to just, police officer just look into every car to make sure that there's no, anything obvious that can break the case wide open. But each vehicle is supposed to be sealed, sent to a crime lab, and then investigated, looked for DNA, fingerprints, any type of little fibers, and anything odd that could possibly connect, some people to the crime. Especially here, because they don't have suspects. Kind of important. What's also really shocking? How little they know at this point. All they talk about in the press conferences, and any press conference that they had, and now they haven't had one in over a week, is how much they just don't know. Why don't you tell us what you do know? How could you possibly investigate and rule so many people out if you don't know anything? Come on. How can this be? They don't even have even a profile on the suspect. There's not even a profile. Come on. You have to have some idea. At least give the public an idea of what to look out for. And I think that's the point. Is that even if you don't know some things, the public is going to still feel very uneasy, feeling like, oh my gosh, they don't even know. They don't have a clue. So naturally, the whole community is on ridiculous edge right now and scared out of their minds. They're freaking scared. And you know what? I don't blame them, because it's a small town and they're feeling like he's among us. And there's not many people to be among. Is it my neighbor? Is it the guy down the street? Is it Joe at Sam's hardware store? There's so much evidence that I think law enforcement is just missing or don't know about or don't have the creativity to think about. And believe it or not, that is a factor. People think that, oh, well, law enforcement, they do this all the time and they know exactly what to do and all the whole checklist and they know who to go to and what capabilities technology has and it doesn't have. They know No, it's not like that. Especially with a small town, that they don't necessarily know everything, such as cell tower pings, such as Wi-Fi pings. So if you're carrying your cell phone or smartwatch or any other type of wireless connectivity, you're pinging along the way. You're constantly giving a digital signature of where you are every step that you go when you're carrying anything with that type of signal. So if this unsub happened to have a cell phone on him or smartwatch or anything technological like that, they would be able to see different pings around where the house is. Keep in mind, this is a small town, small campus. This is not that big of a place where you can see, okay, that cell phone belongs to this person, that cell phone belongs to that person. Oh, there's a cell phone that pinged in this area that can't be accounted for. Who is that person? Who is that cell phone registered to? Okay, things like that. That's information that can be used, accessed, analyzed, and broken down. That's if you have the wherewithal to specifically think to analyze that and to spend time breaking down that type of data. Also, it requires technical expertise. Again, local law enforcement doesn't have that, I'm pretty sure. That's where the FBI should be able to step in and take over that type of analysis at least. And then there's Ethan and Xana's 5-hour gap that's unaccounted for still. It's like, how do you still have that unaccounted for? So basically, Ethan and Xana were two of the victims, of course, sadly, in the house. And that night, they went out to a fraternity party at Sigma Chi. And Ethan is a member of Sigma Chi. Okay. But I think as it turns out, they were only there until 9 or so, and they're not sure where they ended up after that. So it's like, wait a second. That's so pivotal. That's so important. Maybe they ran into somebody. Maybe they were held up. There's still some critical key areas of this whole investigation that's not resolved. I just don't understand it. I don't understand how they can do that. I don't understand how going on to 3 weeks now, they don't have information on that. This was not a desolate campus, though. You had a whole bunch of students walking around. Surely they'll remember them. Apparently Ethan was part of a fraternity. He wasn't this introvert that no one really knew of. People know. How don't you know, guys? Are you not asking the right questions? Are you not asking the right people? People surely know. With an investigation, you have to have a lot of experience investigating these, and you also have to have a lot of creativity. But the thing is, without experience, you don't have much creativity because you have no basis to think of something that can be creative. When you have the experience, you're able to think back to another investigation that you did something like that was very successful, and you're able to do something similar and change it up a bit to tailor to this case and to have that become successful. Without that experience, your creativity is going to be limited. So I think that's what we're watching here. They don't have that much experience. The last murder in the town was 7 years ago, and maybe that was a pretty easy case. So maybe the actual real investigation that they actually had to do could have been in police academy decades ago, so they don't have that experience to even come up with good creative solutions to figure out who the unsub is to track this person down. I think the unsub specifically targeted them, that location, that school, those girls he was looking for, because he knew it would be much easier to get away with it because it was a small town with a lot of trust, open doors, open windows, no technology, no security systems, small police force, inexperienced police force, everything. I think these people targeting small towns will unfortunately be a trend. because it's easier. It's just easier in every way for them to target small towns as opposed to the bigger cities that have all the police infrastructure and all the experience, the video doorbell cameras, the locks on doors, the locks on windows. It's harder. All this person would have had to do is just, drive 3 or 4 hours. That's it. And the chances of him getting away with it were just so much higher. What's also really annoying is how the mainstream media is looking down on social media and people who look into this, whether it's me or, whoever, and here's what I have to say about that. I believe in crowdsourcing, or some people call it crime sourcing. If you look at who found Kaylee Rodney, it was Adventures with Purpose, a social media group. Okay. So, anyone who says that, oh, well, it's just social media. Oh, well, they're just, saying stuff. Yeah, some people do. But I think there are many people in social media, whether it's you all in the comments or some of the creators, that are saying things and bringing things up that the mainstream media isn't even thinking about. They're not even thinking about it. And that's the beauty of this new world of crowdsourcing, I think, is that you're able to bring in so many different insights and different perspectives and different thoughts and ideas of what could have happened and possible ideas of how to investigate something like this to bring people to justice. Because we all want safer streets. We all want a safer community. So we're all on the same team here. So I say bring everyone in, bring people in. Don't try to push people out. And yes, I understand the police, they can't share everything and things like that. In the future, there will be more of a crowdsourcing, crime sourcing type of solution to solving crimes. The best way to solve these harder to solve crimes is by crowdsourcing it. You get everyone on the lookout. You get everyone giving their ideas and resources, time, energy, intellect, all coming together, all for a common good and common purpose that we're all in on for the benefit of society. So it actually makes sense. It's just a matter of how to actually manage it all. The problem that they have with crowdsourcing is taking the good, informative ideas and leads and perspectives from the people that are just going to say something kind of weird. Like, I woke up last night and my grandma told me that, the suspect looks like this, that's the problem. And I think, developing a platform, a system that is going to be able to take the ideas and have the good ideas float to the top, I think that has a very real possibility in our future. The mainstream media and some of the stodgy police departments and other agencies that are trying to resist any of that for whatever stupid reason, I think they just haven't seen the potential yet. So if you're not already subscribed to the Schaik podcast, give it a subscribe, because we don't want you to miss out on new podcasts on criminal psychology covering these current event topics. We are everywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. You can watch the show on YouTube everywhere you get your podcasts. That's where you can get the podcast Shaked. See you at the top.